A very warm welcome. You're watching this special episode of a special show, Global Chit-Chat, where we discuss the important global issues. And we're joined by our foreign policy expert, Mr. Devesh Singh Maini. Thanks a lot for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure. My pleasure.
So, sir, if we talk about the US-Russia relationship, what exactly do you make of the recent meetings that have been held between the US Secretary of State and the Russian foreign minister and the NSAs of the respective countries? Like, what exactly do you think about the entire new meetings that have been held?
So I think we need to keep a couple of things in mind. Virtual days after Biden took over as president, Joe Biden took over as the US president, the START treaty was extended. This happened days after actually Biden took over. So obviously there was a realization that, in spite of all the rhetoric, as we've been discussing our earlier show, that some sort of working relationship is needed with Russia. And more so as, Russia has been getting closer to China to prevent, to at least keep some sort of space where you can work on issues of global importance, together. I mean, so in that context, diplomacy obviously has to be, the Biden administration was very clear that we need to give a chance, a serious chance to diplomacy to resolve issues. So if you look at it, first, you had a conversation. So things actually went downhill after an interview which Joe Biden gave to, very sort of answered in the affirmative when somebody commented that Putin is a killer. Then Russia has reacted strongly to that. But after that, there has been a clear course correction since April 1st. Biden had a conversation with Vladimir Putin on around, I think, April 15th. After that, the US did impose sanctions on Russian individuals and entities, but then the US president made it clear that, he could have gone much farther than that, but basically he wants to leave space for negotiations. So that happened. And then after that, after April again, you have these two meetings, one between the US NSA, as you said, and the Russian foreign minister. And then between the NSA and what is called his counterpart, but what is called this basically the head of the Russian Security Council, which is Nikolay Patrushev, right? So that was, I think, very typical of the way Biden has approached most issues, that make your stand clear, but at the same time, keep the room for diplomacy, for negotiations open. So that is one part of it. The next, now, if you look at the issues which have been discussed, now not much has come out. If you look at the joint statement as far as the meeting between the NSAs is concerned, not much has come out. But the meeting which was held between the US Secretary of State and Foreign Minister Lavrov, in that issues like basically the differences over Ukraine, over certain US media organizations being harassed by the Russian government, over the interference, the meddling in US elections, over hacking. So all that, those reservations were put across, but then again, issues where both could work together, be it, for instance, the nuclear issues related to North Korea and Iran, be it climate change, even in the Arctic, though, of course, the US did express certain reservations, but that there is scope for working, with the Arctic, and number of other, even in, I think, issues related to the Middle East, and all these were discussed. So, basically, you have a whole gamut of issues. There is common ground. There are divergences. But the broader picture, obviously, which you need to understand is that I think one of the primary factors is the this whole anti-West or anti-US camp which is building up, led by China. So now, how does the US ensure that that it doesn't benefit or take advantage of the US being excessively aggressive, or not being open to negotiations and not being flexible.
Well, of course, the meetings are being held, and there will be a future course of action to that. But what exactly do you make of the broader geopolitical implications of these new talks that US and Russia are holding at the moment? Also, given the fact that China and Russia are kind of allies, and what kind of impact do you think that would make, given that US relationship with China, and how will the China angle play out?
So again, I mean, we live in a very different geopolitical world. The earlier drift between Russia and China, which took place if you look from the 1950s onwards, and when you look at when Mao Zedong began to look at Khrushchev with suspicion, one of the reasons obviously was that Russia was considered as pro-West, right? Now that has, after, if you look at the erstwhile USSR, sorry. Now, if you look at the disintegration, after the disintegration of the USSR, obviously things have changed. Even before that, the China-Russia relationship had again begun to sort of, the commonalities and synergies began to explore. But after the disintegration, a number of issues like territorial issues and all agreements took place. Now, but at the same time, there was a clear balance. You see, about a decade ago, neither was China in fact, ironically, China was less skeptical of globalization or Western institutions and all that. And even Russia, I mean, there was some space. If you look at the US-Russia relationship, there was common ground. Now that has obviously changed dramatically, right? So you need to understand the world order first of all. Now, in that context, I think it's all essentially about there being some shades of gray. Now, as I said, there were some shades of gray in global issues, and the other important part is also at the back, both. I mean, obviously, Washington, we discussed earlier the considerations that Moscow should not by default move to Beijing, right? But
yeah,
for Moscow also, I don't think it would like to play second fiddle to Beijing, right? So, because in the past that was one of the issues. At that point of time, obviously, the Chinese felt that Russia, USSR treats them like second. So that is one part. And then Russia also has major differences at a subterranean level. The Chinese still have not forgotten, certain territorial disputes. I mean, obviously they had agreements and everything, but that historical baggage is there. China's increasing clout in Central Asia, that causes discomfort. If you look at amongst people in Russia, if you look at there is a discomfort with the changing demography of the eastern regions, right? So there are issues at play, and that is what strategic analysts within the US have said, that you need to understand that there are major fault lines, and you will need to, well, exploit is a very crude word, but you need to be mindful of these and understand that there is even between Russia and China, there's no total convergence. But don't push Russia to the wall. So this is, I think, all this, at least this engagement, the fact that now, for instance, I think one important part was that, if you look at the dynamic before the meeting between the Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister, an announcement was made that basically with regard to this Nord Stream gas pipeline, which is rather controversial, which sort of the gas pipeline between Russia and Germany, So the US made an announcement that they will be giving certain individuals, the CEO of the project will be exempt from sanctions. So what you're doing is, again, you are even sending the right message out to your allies, because the EU had been not very comfortable. This was a major bone of contention between them.
So basically, how different do you think that the US and Russia relationship could actually evolve under Joe Biden's administration if you compare it to what Donald Trump was and the previous US presidents? How different do you think it could be for both the countries?
So basically, what you have, when you look at bilateral relationships, I think there are three things. One is obviously the course of events. The second is interests, mutual interests. The third is values. Now, obviously, the realists don't give much importance to values. And even if you look at the Trump administration, it was rather transactional. So there was not much talk of values. And that didn't come in the way of any bilateral. For them, that didn't matter at all, human rights and things like that. So, firstly, I think the first thing which is very important is how, geopolitical events over the next few years, if you look at how does, first of all, the China-Russia relationship, how does that pan out? Will there be differences over certain issues at least, or will there be total congruence, right? The second thing is also that if you look at uh, how does this and when you look at the China-Russia relationship, and when you look at the possible rise in Chinese influence or decline, it will depend upon how the US deals with complex global issues. So this one part is what over the next few years, what is the cause of, for instance, the pandemic now, how does the US deal with it? How does China deal with it? Will China and Russia work together? For instance, they're saying that because of on the vaccines, the vaccine diplomacy, they've been working together. So that is the events part. That what geopolitical events? They are always dynamic. They're not dictated by personalities. They're not dictated by. The second part is interests. Now, interests, we've already discussed that there are global issues where there is common ground between Russia and the US. In fact, there is even between China and US, whatever they may say publicly, there will be a number of numerous global issues where basically engagement cannot break down. So that is an interest part. Now the values part is what is problem. So for instance, obviously on human rights issues, for instance, how does Russia treat opposition leaders? I mean, that's one major issue, because the way they're dealing with certain opposition leaders, the way Putin has been dealing with civil society, especially with American media like Voice of America and all that. How do they deal with US businesses? Whether this thing about meddling in US elections, things like hacking, like recently also there was there was an incident of hacking, which of course Biden did not react to very strongly. So that is one part where obviously the US will, because very interesting, the US has said we are ready to find common ground, but at the same time, we will not refrain from protecting ourselves when necessary. That has been said in all, if you look at all the joint statements. And so that is clear. And then the major difference, which is definitely going to be there, is that so you could have better results, but as far as it will not depend upon the personal chemistry between leaders, because again, Trump and Putin had very good personal chemistry. In fact, when charges were made against Putin about meddling in US elections and all, Trump defended him. So chemistry is not going to play a role. It's going to be at every level. So if you see, I mean, if you look at this, coming back to the first question itself, that if you look at the way these meetings have been held, clearly, it's teamwork. So different members of the Biden administration are playing a different role. So chemistry will certainly not play any role. But as far as the first part is concerned about events and interests, it's going to be pretty much similar. There can't be much deviation.
Yeah. And also, do you think that the real impact of all these talks, the new relationship the two countries are trying to forge, will be seen in the long term rather than commenting on a short term period?
Yes, I think, again, I mean, basically, because, it's not only the bilateral part of it, it's about how other US, countries which have good relations with the US, how do they view it? So one example we discussed, for instance, about the European Union, the Nord Stream project. Then there are other issues also. And so for instance, India has had a close relationship with Russia. Recent years, there has been some, because of the India moving closer to the US, there have been changes. But the US cannot lose sight of that. That not just, I mean, so EU, India, many other countries have relations with both, very good relations. Now, the US naturally would not want to have such a relationship with Russia, where their US allies then need to make choices or make difficult choices. That the Trump administration actually expected people to make choices between the US, and now that is not possible. So there is definitely, both from the bilateral perspective and even otherwise from the global perspective as well, it needs to be well thought out, and there needs to be a long-term strategy. It cannot just be, move from one meeting to the other. But the way it's being done so far, without much hype and too many sort of, optics and sound bites, it's encouraging in that sense.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for joining us. I hope that all of the discussion was very helpful to our viewers. Anything, the last point, anything you would like to add?
So I think while all these events are very important, I think ultimately for the next at least 3 to 4 years, at the back of everyone's mind is, how countries deal with the pandemic and how they help each other out. Those events are very dynamic, especially in the context of, with regard to relief materials, vaccines, and then post that, travel, which countries can have. So I think that is what is really going to dictate bilateral relations, in which way the world moves and so on.
True. Of course, our priorities are very different right now. We're reeling under a pandemic. What really matters is that how much a country can help each other. So at this particular time, of course, it is fighting the pandemic together and forging the ties on that note only. So thanks a lot for joining us, sir. And to all our viewers, stay safe, get vaccinated, and keep watching us on Oneindia Eglish.